The first lap was a shock. The steering weight, the throttle response, the way the car transitioned through corners, it was unlike anything Norris had ever felt. It wasn't just precise, it was predictive. The simulator felt alive, anticipating inputs before he made them, correcting its own balance mid-corner. He pushed harder, expecting to find the limit. But the limit kept moving. "It's like it's thinking with you," he whispered. The engineers behind the glass exchanged knowing glances. They'd heard that description before from Verstappen himself, 2 days after his dominant victory in Austin. That was the moment Norris realized what the paddock had been whispering since Texas. Red Bull had found something and Verstappen was the key to it. The car model he was driving wasn't a normal simulation, it was built directly from Verstappen's telemetry data. Every throttle trace, every brake modulation, every steering microcorrection captured from his Austin weekend was here. The sensation wasn't artificial. It was Verstappen's driving translated into machine language. And it didn't feel mechanical. It felt human. When Norris stepped out of the simulator, he looked at the engineers and simply said, "Now I understand." He didn't need to explain. The Red Bull technicians smiled faintly, their pride contained but unmistakable. What he had just experienced was the phenomenon that had electrified their entire factory since the United States Grand Prix, a hidden aerodynamic harmony, discovered through Verstappen's instinct, that made the RB21 more efficient, more stable, and somehow more alive than any other car on the grid. Inside Red Bull, the story had already become legend. During the Austin weekend, Verstappen had reported that the rear feels like it's breathing with the track. The engineers assumed it was a poetic way of describing balance. But when they analyzed the data, they found something no simulation had predicted: a synchronized airflow pattern under the floor that stabilized the entire car. The RB21 was generating aerodynamic self-correction, a phenomenon born by accident but mastered by Verstappen. By the time Formula One arrived in Austin, Texas, the championship battle had shifted dramatically. McLaren had momentum, Ferrari had upgrades, and for the first time in years, Red Bull looked vulnerable. The RB21, the machine meant to continue the Verstappen dynasty, was showing cracks. Its balance window was razor thin, its tire wear unpredictable. And yet, Max Verstappen didn't seem worried. He walked into the paddock on Thursday, calm as ever, headphones on, eyes sharp. "We'll find it," he said to his engineer Gianpiero Lambiase. "The car's talking, we just need to listen." Friday practice began under brutal heat. Track temperatures soared above 45 degrees, and most drivers struggled to keep the car on the limit. Verstappen's first laps were exploratory, smooth, deliberate, almost meditative. The Red Bull looked twitchy from the outside, but his inputs were fluid, gentle. "Rear's more stable than expected," he radioed. "Feels like it's breathing." The team made note, unsure of what he meant. For the rest of the field, grip was a battle. For Verstappen, it was a conversation. Lando Norris, pushing hard in his McLaren, topped FP2 and smiled into the cameras. "We've got the pace," he said. And for a moment, it seemed true. McLaren's MCL40 was surgically fast through the first sector, agile and confident. Red Bull, meanwhile, hid behind heavy fuel runs and muted data. But inside their garage, something unusual was happening. Verstappen's feedback didn't match the telemetry. He was describing aerodynamic behavior, subtle shifts in rear load, smoother transitions mid-corner that the computers couldn't find. "It's not numbers," he told Lambiase. "It's rhythm." Qualifying was the first glimpse of the storm coming. Verstappen's lap was a masterpiece of precision, a 1 minute 32.5 that looked effortless. No slides, no corrections, just flow. He was 0.3 clear of Norris, but the difference wasn't aggression. It was fluidity. Where others fought the track, Verstappen danced with it. The RB21 looked reborn, as if the car itself had rediscovered balance. "That lap was surgical," said one commentator. The truth was, it was more than that. It was instinct at work, the first human confirmation of what Red Bull's sensors were still blind to. Sunday arrived with tension thick in the Texas air. Verstappen lined up on pole under a burning sky, the Red Bull draped in its familiar aura of quiet confidence. The lights went out, and within 5 corners, the outcome felt inevitable. He led into turn 1, defended against Norris's brief attack in sector 2, and then began to build the kind of gap that defines eras. But while the timing screens showed dominance, Verstappen's radio revealed something deeper. "Rear's different today," he said mid-race. "Stable. It settles mid-corner then releases perfectly balanced." The engineers listened, puzzled. They hadn't made any overnight mechanical changes. Yet the car's aerodynamic behavior had transformed. Behind him, Norris struggled. His McLaren was fast in short bursts but burned through tires with alarming speed. Each time he closed the gap, Verstappen responded not with brute force, but with precision. By lap 40, the Red Bull was gliding through the S's like a symphony in motion. "He's just managing it," Norris said afterward, almost in admiration. "He's not even pushing." What Norris didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Verstappen had sensed a phenomenon the engineers hadn't even discovered. The RB21's floor, redesigned for efficiency in Monza and paired with a reprofiled front wing from Singapore, had triggered a perfect aerodynamic resonance. The car had started generating self-stabilizing airflow, a subtle, invisible rhythm that Verstappen alone had detected from the cockpit. When the checkered flag fell, Verstappen crossed the line 12 seconds clear. He didn't shout, didn't celebrate wildly. He just thanked the team, calm and measured. "That felt different," he said. It wasn't arrogance, it was awareness. To him, the car's transformation wasn't luck. It was something he'd been expecting, something he'd felt building race by race. He didn't need the data to tell him what was happening. He knew. The engineers stayed up all night running analysis. The next morning, they saw at the underfloor pressure fluctuations that matched Verstappen's feedback word for word. The car's aerodynamic platform had synchronized with the track, absorbing turbulence instead of fighting it. Adrian Newey called it a harmonic effect, something he'd theorized for years but never fully achieved. And Verstappen? He'd sensed it instantly. He was describing airflow behavior like an engineer, one Red Bull aerodynamicist said later. Except he was doing it at 200 miles an hour. Austin, once seen as a battle for survival, had become a scientific revelation, a moment that redefined Red Bull's understanding of the RB21 and their drivers' connection to it. The data from that race became the foundation for everything that followed: the aerodynamic refinements for Mexico, the new simulator model, and the quiet, stunned respect of every engineer who saw what Verstappen's intuition could uncover. The discovery began in the aerodynamics suite. Red Bull's engineers were running a standard airflow review, comparing track telemetry to the results from their wind tunnel and CFD, computational fluid dynamics, models. At first, everything looked routine. But when they focused on the underfloor pressure data, they noticed an unusual pattern, a rhythmic stabilization that shouldn't have existed. Normally, airflow under the floor fluctuates with every steering input, every bump, every throttle modulation. But Verstappen's car was different. The airflow wasn't fighting those inputs, it was syncing with them. Adrian Newey, the architect of so many Red Bull masterpieces, leaned over the data and went quiet. The entire room waited. "It's harmonic," he said finally. "He's stabilizing the aero map with his driving." The engineers stared in disbelief. The idea that a driver could influence aerodynamic stability with input timing sounded impossible, but the data didn't lie. Verstappen's throttle and steering traces aligned perfectly with underfloor pressure oscillations. Through instinct, he was modulating the car's aerodynamic behavior in real time. The RB21 wasn't just a car anymore, it was an extension of him. They called it the harmonic floor effect. The combination of the new Monza floor and the Singapore front wing had unintentionally created an interaction of vortices beneath the car, a self-sustaining aerodynamic rhythm. Under normal conditions, this would cause instability, but Verstappen's driving style, smooth, consistent, and brutally precise, turned it into an advantage. His throttle modulation was perfectly timed to the car's aerodynamic pulse, creating a feedback loop of stability. "He's not just driving it," said one engineer. "He's tuning it." Word of the discovery spread through the factory like wildfire. Within 48 hours, Red Bull had rebuilt the simulator model using Verstappen's Austin telemetry. They wanted to understand how it felt, to experience what he had described over the radio, the sensation of the car breathing with the track. Engineers, mechanics, even simulation technicians took turns testing it. The results were the same every time. The car felt unusually intuitive, almost sentient. Then came the twist no one saw coming: a visit from McLaren's Lando Norris. Norris had stopped by for a joint sponsor event, and one of the engineers jokingly offered him a seat in the simulator. "Why not?" he said, laughing. Minutes later, he wasn't laughing anymore. The moment the virtual RB21 came to life, Norris felt the difference. The steering was lighter yet more precise. The rear didn't slide it anticipated. The car seemed to correct its own oversteer mid-corner. He ran a few laps, then pulled off the headset, eyes wide. "That's not a simulator," he said. "That's alive." What he'd experienced was Verstappen's car exactly as he'd driven it in Austin, every trace of input, every nuance of throttle, replicated in full detail. Norris had felt the harmonic effect himself, the aerodynamic synchronization that no other driver had ever triggered. He looked around the room and muttered, half in awe, half in disbelief, "So this is what he's feeling every lap?" The engineers simply nodded. They didn't need to explain. He had just experienced the phenomenon that had made Verstappen untouchable in Austin. Back in the aerodynamics lab, Newey and his team worked to formalize the discovery. They mapped the interaction between the RB21's floor tunnels, beam wing, and diffuser under different airflow conditions. What they found was staggering. The harmonic pattern didn't just make the car faster, it made it predictable. In Formula One, predictability is everything. It meant Verstappen could push harder, for longer, without losing confidence. It explained his surgical precision in Sector 2 of Austin, why he could place the car within centimeters of perfection lap after lap without degradation. The implications were massive. Red Bull realized that this harmonic stability would become even more powerful in Mexico, where thinner air exaggerates aerodynamic effects. The RB21's newfound efficiency wasn't just an advantage, it was exponential. The car could run lower ride heights without the usual porpoising risk, generating massive downforce while maintaining efficiency. "Mexico will amplify it," Newey said in a private briefing. "We're about to see something very special." Verstappen's response, when told about the findings, was pure calm. "I knew it felt different," he said, almost smiling. The car was singing. For him, the discovery wasn't a surprise, it was confirmation. He'd felt it before the sensors saw it, described it before the models proved it. That's what separates him. While others drive by numbers, Verstappen drives by sensation, his instincts so finely tuned that they reveal truths even engineers can't immediately see. Lando Norris's experience in that simulator would later become the talk of the paddock. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was humbling. It showed that Verstappen's genius wasn't in technology or luck, it was in awareness. He could feel the air move, sense the unseen, predict the future behavior of a car faster than any algorithm. As one Red Bull engineer said quietly, "You can't program that."